This is definitely the coolest retro case that we've seen for any SBC in a very long time, and it's been something that me and a lot of other people out there have been kind of waiting on. And of course, over the past couple years, we've seen a few different cases with this N64 styling, but a lot of them were kind of hard to get your hands on. Most of them were kind of homemade using a 3D printer. But Retroflag just dropped their new 64 Pi case for the Raspberry Pi 5, and for this setup here, I'm going to be using a 4GB Raspberry Pi 5. The case itself is available over on their official website and Amazon. I'll leave links in the description. And at the time of making this video, we've only got one color variant, but it definitely looks like we could see more down the road. Again, I've been looking forward to a case like this for a very long time, and I actually thought that Retroflag would have released this a while ago with the Raspberry Pi 4, but I guess they wanted to wait a little while, and it's now here for the Raspberry Pi 5. This includes all of the hardware to get this thing assembled. It also comes with a screwdriver and a heatsink for your Raspberry Pi. There's a reset button and a power button, and if you want to use that reset button, you will have to use their specialized script, but yeah, this thing looks absolutely amazing. And what we've got here is the clear blue version. At the time of making this video, it's the only one they have up on their website. And if you remember correctly, the clear blue N64 was a Japanese exclusive console. I think they got it pretty close here. Personally, I'm a big fan of what they've done here. I think it looks really good. And up top, you see we've got an expansion port. Now, this isn't for an expansion card like on the original N64. This is actually SD card storage. So if you've got several different SD cards that you run different operating systems on, you can store them directly in here. And assembly with the Pi 64 case is actually pretty simple. We're just going to go ahead and take the top off. You can see we've got a PCB in here, and this is going to connect to the GPIO on the Raspberry Pi. Plus, we've got dual front-facing USB. It's going to take up both of those USB 2.0 ports on the Pi, and a built-in fan to keep this thing nice and cool. It's going to blow directly on the included heatsink. I've already installed the included thermal pads on my Raspberry Pi 5, and this is just going to make contact with the included heatsink here. The heatsink that comes included with this does seem a bit thin, but there's not a lot of room to work inside of this case, plus we've got that built-in fan. Now that I've got the heatsink attached, it's time to get the Raspberry Pi 5 inside of the case. It actually just mounts in the top half of the shell, and once we put this in, we do need to plug this into our GPIO. It's actually a bit tricky to get to, but if you put your thumb under it, just give it a little bit of pressure, you can plug it directly in. Once we have that in place, we'll go ahead and plug in the dual USB. Again, it's going to take up those two USB 2.0 ports on the Pi, but it's just going to bring them around front for us. And yeah, it looks like everything's in place. We'll go ahead and mount the Pi in. Comes with the 4 screws. Before I put the bottom half of the shell on, I just want to make sure that all of my ports are lining up. Now, one thing I'd love to see here is full-size HDMI, but it just leaves us with the HDMI on the Pi. The bottom half of the shell should go on pretty easily, and we still get access to Ethernet and our 2 USB 3 ports on the Pi. Plus, we've got a little hatch that we can remove, so if we want to close this up, we can just go ahead and put it right on. So far, it's going together really nicely. I've just got 4 screws that I need to add to the bottom half of the shell. And we've got easy access to the SD card slot on the Pi right here on the bottom. And I really do love the fact that they did include this hatch here, because if I've got this set up as a retro console, I probably won't need to access USB and Ethernet most of the time. USB 2 up front is fine, because if you're going to be using wired controllers, that's going to work out great. But remember, the Raspberry Pi 5 does have Bluetooth built in, and there's a lot of great wireless controllers out there that are going to work. I mentioned at the beginning that we do have a dedicated power button up here. It's a slider, just like on the original N64, and the reset button is spring-loaded. But in order for the reset button to work, you will need to install their script from the official website. Power button's going to work no matter what. But overall, I do think it's a really good looking case, and I'm glad they went with that clear blue. I think it sets it off. It looks really nice like this. I'm going to be running Batocera from a 32GB micro SD card, but in order to get some thermal testing done, I've also got Raspberry Pi OS on a separate SD card. And by the end, we'll get a feel for if this thing's overheating with a little bit of an overclock, because right now I've actually overclocked this to 2.8 gigahertz. If you've got a good chip in your Pi, you could go up to 3, but the Pi 5 that I'm using right now was actually one of the first ones that was released with 4 gigs of RAM, and I've always had trouble going up to 3 gigahertz with it. It's been a while since I messed around with Batocera on any device, and there's been a lot of updates for the Raspberry Pi 5 and all of the other devices that they support. Right now, I just wanted to run a couple N64 games because obviously we've got an N64 case here. I think it just makes sense to go with that. And for a while now on the Pi 5 with Batocera, you've been able to easily overclock from the menu. We've got a couple to choose from, but again, I'm at 2.8 right now. If your Pi can handle it, if you've got a good chip, you could probably go up to 3, and that's the extreme setting they have here. But for most of the retro games that I'm going to be playing on this, I think 2.8 gigahertz is going to be plenty. And right now I'm using a Bluetooth Ultimate controller from 8BitDo, and I looked for my N64 controller. Long time ago they released a really nice N64 Bluetooth controller, but for the life of me I cannot find it. I'm not exactly sure what happened to it, but I really did want to get that out, pair it up, and just kind of get the full experience. But using a nice 8BitDo controller does give me more flexibility because I will be running more games than just N64 on this setup, even though we're slammed inside of an N64 shell.
Sub-Zero wins. Round 2, fight! Superb!
So I've been messing around with this for a little while with Batocera installed, and everything's working great with that 2.8 gigahertz overclock. N64 seems to be running really well here on the Raspberry Pi 5, but I did want to check out some thermals with this, and I think the easiest way to do this is just install Raspberry Pi OS and run some 10-minute stress tests. What we're going to do here is take a look at the cooling system in the Pi 64 versus the official Raspberry Pi active cooler. Okay, so here's what I found. 4GB Pi 5, we've got an overclock of 2.8 on the CPU, 850 on the GPU. Running Raspberry Pi OS, running a 10-minute stress test. The official Raspberry Pi active cooler reaches 66 degrees Celsius, and the 64 Pi case does reach 69. So it is a bit hotter, and I kind of expected it would be, given that we're in a case here. But luckily, we're still under that thermal throttle limit. So overall, I love the look, it's easy to assemble, and it serves its purpose. Really awesome that we've got that expansion port up top for extra micro SD card storage. And if you're interested in picking one up, I'll leave links in the description. You can get it on Amazon or the official Retroflag website. They're $29.99, and yeah, $30 for a Raspberry Pi case is a bit steep, but if you've been looking for something like this, this is probably going to be your best bet right now. Let me know in the comments below what you think about the design. Like always, thanks for watching.